So you've got the talent, the drive, the passion, and everything it takes to be a star athlete. You've put in the hours, sacrificed the weekends, and pushed your body to the limit. But there's one common trap that nearly every athlete falls into, one that can completely derail your career before it even begins to take off. And here's the kicker. If you don't fix this right now, you're practically guaranteed that you'll never reach your full potential. As a mental performance coach, I've seen this trap capture countless academy stars, top college prospects, and even those at the pro level. So in this video, I'm going to reveal exactly what this trap is, why it's so dangerous, and also how you can avoid it to make sure that you stay on the path to greatness. So let's get started. Right, so what is this trap that so many high potential athletes fall into each year? Well, let's chat about Dylan. He's a top college basketball prospect with the potential to go all the way to the NBA. He's got the skills, the work ethic, and the drive to make it big. But despite all that, Dylan keeps running into obstacles that hold him back from performing his best on the court. Take, for example, Dylan's obsession with what other players are doing. He constantly checks out his competition on social media, comparing their highlights, their stats, and even their workout routines. He's always wondering if they're one step ahead of him. Then there's the pressure he feels from scouts and recruiters. Every time he's out on the court, he's thinking about whether they'll notice his every mistake, or worse, what happens if they don't even notice him at all? And it doesn't stop there. Dylan also gets caught up in things that he can't possibly influence, like whether the coach is going to switch up the starting lineup at the last minute, or whether the crowd will be hostile during big away games. These thoughts keep piling up, causing stress and anxiety that just sap Dylan's energy and focus. Because of this, Dylan lets a lot of the things that are on him slide. Things like eating well, getting enough sleep, and how hard and focused he plays in practice. So what's going on here? Dylan is falling into a common trap. He's spending too much time worrying about the things that he can't control or massively influence. And this is a huge mistake that even the most talented athletes make. They get distracted by so many external sources of stress and noise, causing them to obsess over things that they actually have no power over. And it ends up hurting their game massively. But here's the solution. A basic concept that, if you keep in mind regularly, can stop you from making the same mistakes as Dylan. And this concept is the circles of control. It's a simple but powerful framework that helps you understand where you should be focusing your energy. By recognizing what's within your control, what you can influence, and also what's completely out of your hands, you can shift your focus to what really matters and start reaching your true potential. So the circles of control comprises 3 circles. The first and most important circle is the circle of control. This represents everything that is directly within your power, things that you can actively manage or change through your own actions. For Dylan, his circle of control includes his training routine, his nutrition, how much sleep he gets, and his mindset. It's the decisions he makes every day, like how hard he pushes himself in practice, how he responds to feedback from his coach, and how well he mentally prepares for each game. And the more you look, the more you actually realize how much is actually within your control. But you're maybe not devoting enough attention to optimizing these things. Like Dylan, you may also be guilty of spending more of your time and energy in the other circles. The next one of which is the circle of influence. This circle includes things that you can't directly control, but you can impact to some degree. For Dylan, this might include his relationships with teammates, how he interacts with his coaches, and his reputation with scouts. He can't control whether a teammate plays well, but he can encourage them and help build team chemistry. He can't make a scout offer him a contract, but he can influence their perception of him by consistently performing well on the court and showing leadership qualities. And although athletes have some influence, they often overestimate how much they really do. And this means they once again spend more than their fair share of time on this area. These are athletes who are constant people pleasers, really trying hard to get everyone to like them. They obsess with every interaction that they have with coaches, recruiters, or their teammates, hoping that they'll just be accepted. But the reality is, in sport, you can't control what people think of you. Yes, you can influence it to some extent, but every single person has their own biases, their opinions, and worldviews that can sometimes just be impossible to change. Chances are you've played with teammates who just don't like you no matter what you do, or coaches who don't rate you no matter how well you play. Unfortunately, that's just life. And if you spend too much time desperately trying to change these opinions of others, you're just stealing energy and focus from the things that really do make an impact. All of those things inside your circle of control. And then the outermost circle is the circle of concern. This includes everything that might worry Dylan, but is completely outside of his control. For example, how well other top college prospects are performing, what the media are saying about him, or whether the refs make a bad call. These are the things that Dylan and all other athletes need to let go of. But unfortunately, it's very easy to spend a lot of mental energy in this circle. But if you do that, then all you're really doing is banging your head against the wall. You're exerting so much effort and attention on things that ultimately you have no control over whatsoever. And once again, that would be energy, effort, and attention that, if spent inside your circle of control instead, would dramatically improve your performances and situation for the better. Now let's take a step back and actually think about how most athletes, including top prospects like Dylan, actually spend their time and energy across these three circles. The truth is, many athletes get this balance completely wrong. From my experience in working with athletes at all levels, I see time and time again that most athletes spend the majority of their mental energy in the circle of concern, worrying about things that they just can't control. It's almost a human default to do things like stressing over a rival's performance, fixating on what the media has to say, or agonizing over a coach's decision that you have no influence over. When I first started working with athletes, I'd say on average that they spend only 20 to 30% on the circle of control, around 20% on the circle of influence, and then around 50 to 60% of their time on the circle of concern. And unfortunately, all this does is cause so much anxiety, worry, and stress, and a lack of focus on actually doing the things that will improve their game. But instead, I argue that all athletes should look to change those percentages to find a healthier alternative. So what I tend to suggest is to aim to spend 70% of your time and energy in the circle of control. This means dedicating yourself to what you can directly change: your training, your diet, your preparation, and your mental game. These are the things that should be at the forefront of your mind most of the time, because this is where you'll see the biggest returns on your investment. And then I suggest spending 20% of your energy on the circle of influence, because in sport, it's still important to devote some time to building positive relationships, being a supportive teammate, and influencing the aspects that you can without overextending yourself. Again, we can influence other people, but we can't directly control them. So we have to be comfortable with the fact that in some cases we can do all of the right things to improve our reputation among others, or just manage the perceptions that they have of us, but it's still ultimately on them to change their tune about how they feel about us. And then lastly, I still think it's a good idea to spend around 10% of your time in the circle of concern, because you still want to be mindful of rivals, because there's a limited number of contracts or draft picks that you're actually fighting for. So you still need to know what the competition is doing so that you can then up your game or improve your approach where needed. And you can also use things like media comments or things written and said about you as fuel and motivation to try harder and shut them up. That's a perfectly fine thing to do, but just within reason. But ultimately, you have to accept that some things are outside of your control and that you've got to let them go. By doing this, you free up mental space to focus on what really matters. So now that you understand the importance of focusing on your circle of control, you might be wondering, well, how do I actually make this shift? Because it's easier said than done, especially when you're used to worrying about things not necessarily within your control. But don't worry, I've got you covered. Here are 3 simple tips that are going to help you start spending more of your time in the circle of control and less time in the 2 other circles. The first is notice, then bin it. So what this involves is, before practice or performance, get out some sticky notes and write down on each of these all of the things that typically get you worried or stressed out. So just simple things like coach shouting at me or getting called for fouls, all of the things that you know your mind typically gets caught up in. Then what you do is look at each of these things and ask yourself, which circle does this really belong to? And if what you've written on those sticky notes is something that falls into either the circle of influence or concern, then you need to scrunch it up and throw it in the bin. So this technique is often used by therapists, where they get people to write letters about the various pains and struggles that they're currently experiencing. And then after writing them, they're then asked to either burn them, rip them up, or throw them away. And although it sounds a bit weird, it can be stupidly effective, because 1, you're actually getting these things off your mind, and then 2, you're symbolically letting go of them by putting them in the trash. It's like a mental switch or cue, where suddenly that thing is done, it's gone, and there's no need to pay any more attention to it. And then you'll also be left with a few sticky notes of things that you 100% control, and then you can then focus on those things for your upcoming practice or game. Then strategy number 2 is to use if-then planning. So for this one, before your next practice or game, take a few minutes to think about the situations that typically throw you off your game. Maybe it's when you start worrying about the weather, or whether you feel anxious when you see a scout or recruiter in the stands. Whatever it is, identify those triggers, those moments where your mind starts drifting into the circle of concern. And then for each of these triggers, you're then going to create an if-then statement. It's like setting up a mental roadmap for how you'll handle these situations when they arise. So for example, if I start worrying about how the other team is playing, then I'll immediately focus on my defensive stance and positioning. The beauty of this technique is that it's proactive. You're not waiting to get distracted. You're preparing your mind to automatically switch to something productive when a distraction pops up. It's like setting up a mental autopilot to keep you grounded in your circle of control when there is that temptation to get thrown into the circle of concern. By regularly practicing if-then planning, you're basically training yourself to respond to distractions with purposeful action. Over time, this not only helps you stay focused during critical moments, but also reduces the mental fatigue that can come from constantly battling with worries. It's a simple shift, but it can make a massive difference in how you perform under pressure. And then the last strategy is to build your pre-performance routines. You've probably already got some in place, but just as a reminder, pre-performance routines are a sequence of actions that you perform before every practice or game to get into the right mindset. These routines help you focus solely on what you can control, setting the tone for your performance and reducing anxiety about external factors. And for a complete guide on how to form truly performance enhancing routines, then you should watch this video next.